Alright, so in the back of the car here, we have a stereo that was installed by the previous owner. We have 2 speakers and an amplifier underneath this panel. We also have an 1/8" headphone jack. Now that works out in theory, but not sure what happened when this was first installed in the car and now, but when the wiring was done, probably can't see it in here, but it was tied under the fuse block without any fuse. It was tied directly to a line that comes off the battery, and there's 0 fuse anywhere in the circuit. Now when I had my iPhone connected to the 1/8" headphone jack, when the car was off, meaning the engine was not running, everything worked fine. But then when I plugged in my iPhone to the headphone jack when the engine was actually running, something weird happened, and it ended up catching a small fire on the wire. The wire ended up disintegrating, melting through. Huge plume of smoke came out, super scary. It was maybe only the 2nd or 3rd day I actually had the car, and it could have been a lot worse than it really was, or what it ended up being. So the car got a little bit of smoke residue up under the dash and a few things. I think some insulation might have been charred just a tiny bit, but luckily really nothing happened. No permanent damage of any sort. The wiring that was used for the radio completely disintegrated because it was also undersized, in addition to not having a fuse in line. So very troubling experience. Ever since then I've had the radio disconnected. So what I'm going to go ahead and do, don't really feel like trusting the existing amplifier. I've purchased another amplifier which will go in place. It'll be using the 14 gauge wire similar to what I installed for the fuel injection system under the dash previously. I will have, of course, an inline fuse, and the new amplifier runs off Bluetooth, so I don't have to worry about any kind of weird connections. Using an 1/8" headphone jack here, I can remove all this. And then I'll use the existing wiring from the amplifier to the speakers. So all of that's going to be good to go. It should be a pretty straightforward install. I just need to switch over the old amplifier to the new amplifier, add an inline fuse under the dash, and we will not have to do any modifications to this, which is fantastic with the original AM FM radio. So there you have it. Let's go ahead and get this started. I'm going to clear off the storage door and disconnect the amplifier connections. Alright, so we got the amplifier disconnected here. We have our existing wiring. Go ahead and use the ground, power, and remote turn on. Those are wired up into the dash already, but are not connected underneath there. As I alluded to earlier when I had the incident with the smoke / fire a couple months ago, I never got around to reconnecting it, and I didn't really trust what was going on there, so didn't want to risk it, so never hooked it back up. So we'll get everything wired to the new amplifier. This is going to be the correct gauge wire. It's a very small amplifier, not anything super impressive, won't be super loud, but it will give me Bluetooth to my phone, and it should be sufficient enough for me. I don't need anything crazy, super loud, or show worthy. So we'll get the old speaker there, over there, and then the other one will sit on top of this, and the new amplifier will sit in the same place as the other one did. It's only about 1/4 of the size, so be pretty straightforward from back here. And then once everything is wired up here, we can go ahead and close everything up, and then we just got to get our ignition and battery connected up there. With the amp disconnected and removed, I can focus on cleaning up the wiring and tying in the new amplifier. I will also add in a new blue wire for the remote turn on. Picked up some of these connectors off Amazon, which I thought were kind of cool. Basically, you take the wire, strip it down, feed it in from either end, and it shrink wraps, and in the middle there's actually a little bit of solder that with the heat gun it gets hot enough to melt it, and it solders the connection together. So I've already done a few of these on the amplifier. Pretty hard to see, unfortunately, but you can see that the, well, in person you can see that the wiring is soldered inside there. They're nice and shrink wrapped. I'll still go ahead and wrap these with some electrical tape and then wrap all this together in some insulation loom. To make things nice and clean, I'll throw in some zip ties and wire loom to cover up the collection of wires that will sit in the storage compartment. I will need to remove some trim pieces so I can tie into the remote turn-on wire that I just installed. Alright, let's get the wiring under the dash done here. So we're going to go ahead, take this inline fuse, this female connector here, tap into this spade connector here. This one next to it is actually powering the switch over here for the fuel injection, as well as the fuel pump. So it acts as a ignition wire. So that's only going to get power when I flip this on. What I can do is also tie in the blue remote wire from the amplifier into that same wire, which is actually a red wire going back down through here into the trunk. I'll go ahead and tap into that later. That'll give us a turn-on switch for what will now control the fuel injection system and the radio. After shooting this portion of the video, I decided to run the power wire just to the other side of the firewall and directly to the battery. This will be safer and minimize chance of alternator whine or other noise introduced into the speakers. Alright, let's go ahead and turn on the ignition switch. You can hear the fuel pump priming. Of course, that's every time the car is turned on for the fuel injection system. This will activate the amplifier in the trunk. Since I'm using my phone to record out of my computer, I am connected over Bluetooth. You simply gotta find the device and connect. Let's get some music here. Gotta find something that's not gonna get me in trouble from a copyright standpoint. Sounds pretty good. Wasn't expecting anything crazy, as I mentioned earlier. This is actually a marine amplifier you can use on boats and stuff, but it's the only one I could find that was reasonable price that had Bluetooth, which was critical here. I want to be able to use my phone, put my phone in my pocket, put it in the dashboard, whatever, and just control it from there. Not have to worry about any wires or anything. Just enough music to play while I'm cruising with the roof down. It's pretty loud anyway, the exhaust and everything, so yeah, this should definitely do it. I'm pretty happy with it. Pretty straightforward install here. Wish I could show a little more, but since it's music, not really too much to show. Thanks, guys.